NPR reporter Sarah McCammon has a new memoir released of growing up evangelical and then leaving the evangelical movement and declaring herself ex-evangelical. Exvangelical. The book is called The Ex-Vangelicals, Loving, Living, and Leaving the White Evangelical Church. Loving, living, and leaving. I have that on my wall. It's my laugh, love.
Love,
sounds
live,
like
leave.
Sounds like really bad dating advice.
Oh, no.
Oh, dear. She talks, Sarah, is it Sarah? It's Sarah. Yes, it's Sarah. Mm-hmm. She talks about when she was 12 years old, these fun evangelical memories, although this is definitely more on the fundamentalist side. Her fear of damnation became so strong that she at one point grabbed a knife and threatened to kill herself. Her parents responded by spanking her, exactly as recommended by evangelical parenting experts like James Dobson. Okay, that could leave a mark. Then she rushed into a marriage, which ended in divorce. And when she turned to her family for support, they accused her of apostasy and warned her she might be going to hell. Okay, I'm just going to say that's pretty extreme for evangelicalism. That's not broadly painted evangelicalism, but I know that sort of thing is part of it. So the person who's writing this said that they closed this book, and it's a professor, I believe from, is it University of Chicago, a professor of religion from University of Chicago, that William Schultz wrote this, who is, University of Chicago Divinity School, wrote this. And this is where I thought it gets interesting. He says, I close the Ex-Vangelicals wondering if we are now witnessing the end of evangelicalism. He says, I'm not suggesting white conservative Protestants will vanish anytime soon. Rather, I wonder if the identity of evangelical, promoted by figures such as Billy Graham and institutions like Christianity Today as a kinder, gentler alternative to fundamentalist, is fading. Okay. We've been talking about this literally since show one.
Yes.
Show one, we asked the question, is the term now useless and do we need a new term?
Okay, but I think that the nuance that he's getting at here is worth talking about, which is what we are labeling evangelicalism isn't really just old school fundamentalism, and therefore our ex-evangelicals not really leaving evangelicalism, they're reacting to fundamentalism. They're ex-fundies is what they are. They're not ex-evangelicals.
Well, yeah.
Even in her story, it sounds an awful, like you said, it sounds like fundamentalism.
Here's my question before Caitlin tells us what's really going on, and we both recognize that we're wrong, which is about to come. So hold that thought, Caitlin. Because I've talked about this before, the great blurring of fundamentalism and neo-evangelicalism that happened because we needed a bigger voting bloc. And the only way we could get the maximum size voting bloc to exert more political influence was by bridging the divide that once existed between Billy Graham evangelicals and Bob Jones style fundamentalists. But because of that, all of the worst behaviors of, kind of the extreme ends of things started all being referred to as evangelicalism. And so now we're at a point where we've kind of ruined a label that once had a distinct meaning. Okay, Caitlin, tell us how we're wrong.
No, I think that's mostly right. The part of the article that I think is really helpful is this section that's basically like, this is an intra-evangelical conversation. And even the people who have left it, the last paragraph talks about the people who are uniting around ex-evangelical are people who are uniting around, I have a common enemy in the evangelicalism I grew up with and all of its great faults. And I think it would be beneficial for all of us to recognize that the stories we tell about our own religious upbringing and our families and our identity are always changing, and they're shaped by the stories we hear from other people. And so sometimes we might think that there's a single story about evangelicalism because we're hearing a bunch of the same stories and we're finding the places in our own history that match up with it. And we go, okay, this is the story about evangelicalism, without remembering that maybe 5 or 10 years ago, we told a different version of our own story with evangelicalism. We highlighted different parts. We remembered things differently. Our emotional attachment to it has changed. So I think for just an ability to think well about our own past and think well about what needs to change, what are the biggest issues and what are not, it would be helpful for us to reflect on how has my own telling of my own story changed, And how do I think about a diversity of stories? Like sometimes when a story like this journalist story is told, people respond with, well, that's not what I grew up with, as if there needs to be a single story about evangelicalism that is correct, instead of saying, yeah, this is a story that fits within the kinds of churches I grew up in and the kind of culture and the publishing and all of that kind of loosely defines evangelicalism. It's a true story that I need to take in as part of this larger tradition. And I need to listen to the story of someone who says, I had great Sunday school teachers who taught me to love Jesus. I didn't hate my body. I wasn't scared of eternal damnation. Or I was a little bit, but it wasn't as totalizing as this. And being able to hold all those stories together is important, not only for having a right-sized view of evangelicalism, which is what's at stake in this article, but I think a lot more importantly for many of us to be able to say, I want to be able to receive the things from my past that are good, criticize the things that are not good, but not feel like other people's stories have to totally determine how I think about my own past or this kind of really diverse, unwieldy group of people that I, in some sense, belong to. Even if I no longer am a part of an evangelical church, I come from those people. I belong to them in a certain sense. This one story is an important part of that, but it's not the whole story. And neither is my story the whole story.
Kay, how has your retelling of your story changed in the last 5 years, Caitlin?
That's a good question, Phil. I mean, I honestly think when I was in college, the version I told of my church upbringing was pretty negative because I was hearing stories like this. And I went, oh, I remember a, youth leader telling me that if I was, sexually active before I got married, I was like a chewed up piece of gum that no one wanted to chew again. And I would go, oh gosh, that, I learned purity culture. I was scared of the rapture. So I hear these stories. I hear them from other students at college. I also hear them from articles online and books like this. And I start to highlight those features of my background, which are true features. And there's things in my background I want to criticize. In the years since then, I also sometimes hear stories like this and go, oh, that wasn't me. I was never this afraid. I was never punished this. I was loved unconditionally by my parents. If I had expressed what this person expressed, my parents would have been deeply concerned and responded with great love. They would not have responded with this kind of discipline. But also, as I now am like a very fallen, finite person trying to teach people in the church, I also think I just have some more grace for the 20-year-old youth leader who gave me that chewed up gum analogy, because she was taught that from someone else and I shouldn't have been treating everything she said like the word of God anyway. And so I feel like over time, I have a much more positive view of my own past, not only because I realize that I'm going to make lots of mistakes in what I teach in church, but also because I see that there's these negative things that were there, but there was also all these really positive gifts that I don't want to forget in the telling of it either. And this isn't me trying to tell people, remember what was really good about it, stop paying attention to the negative stuff. But if we want to know how to move forward, we can't tell one part of the story. We have to tell the whole story. We have to tell the parts that were good and the parts that were bad if we want to be able to distinguish in the future from the things that are good and the things that are not good.
Yeah, I remember going forward at an altar call. I was probably 7, maybe 8, and it was the second or third time I'd been saved. But this time it was in response to a traveling evangelist who had just ripped a Ouija board in half in the pulpit, and had asked people to bring, when he was coming, had asked people to bring rock and roll albums. If they had any rock and roll albums in their homes, that they should bring them to the church and that he would smash them. And so that's probably the most kind of fundy my childhood got, because that shortly thereafter we moved to Wheaton. I guess 4 years later we moved to Wheaton, and our new church, that was Muscatine, Iowa. Our new church was full of Wheaton College faculty that were very squarely, neo-evangelical, Carl Henry, Billy Graham, and they're just that whole thing. Although we still watched the James Dobson film series when it came out, the one that put him on the map to tell us all how to parent, even the kids. So it was this weird mix of, okay, that's really kind of fundy, that's more neo-EVVV, and then this continuum in between, because then I would go to the Bible conference on weekends, and Aunt Pearl would tell kids that Satan was like a shark that wanted to eat them. And wow, the conversion rate was astonishing. You're right, it's not as neat and clean as we would like it to be. And even how I tell my own story, kind of skews on what point I'm trying to make to myself at any given time.
Is one of the dynamics going on here is this story, I mean, how many times have we heard this story in the last 15 years, right? The kid who grew up in an evangelical / fundamentalist environment, who felt unloved, fearful, body shamed, all these things, and grows up, realizes, oh, this was really terrible, and now is left. We've heard this story over and over and over and over again. What we don't hear as many stories about are people coming into the evangelical world and finding Christ there. And I don't know what the real stats are, but the perception, because of the storytelling that's going on, is it's this mass exodus of people coming out from negative,
it's
abuseful...
a one-way revolving door.
Exactly. And my hunch is this has always been happening, but because we're not seeing people entering into this subculture of American evangelicalism, it feels more dire. Like it is an exodus rather than just a churning that happens in any religious community. And that, I think, is legitimate. I think there probably is more people leaving than entering.